Welcome to the Father on Purpose podcast, featuring author and ministry leader Kent Evans and business executive and military veteran Lawson Brown. This is a show for you, Dad. You want to be a godly and intentional father. Unfortunately, you've turned to these two knuckleheads for help. Let us know how that works out for you. Before we begin, remember this: you are not a father on accident. So go be a father on purpose. Please welcome your hosts, Kent and Lawson.
So Lawson, we recently sent out a survey to all of the dads who are on our email list, and we got back dozens and dozens of answers to the survey, and we asked one very simple question. What is one way you'd like to grow or improve in the coming year? And we got all kinds of answers. Long form, guys typing out. We had people sharing all kinds of intentions and goals. And last week we talked a little bit about one sort of angle on some of those answers. And this week we want to dive into a common thread that I saw in all of those survey responses. And many of them, I would say better than 70 or 80% of them, somehow tied to relationships. Men said they wanted to have better relationships with their kids, their wives, people in their churches, their staffs, etc. So we're going to dive into that today and look at what are some ways we can have stronger and more fruitful relationships around us for dads. I'm pumped about today's topic. Looking forward to it.
Me too. And I love that. Like me, you geeked out pretty hard on the survey data. Like you created a spreadsheet. You've got it categorized. Very smart. And for sure, relationship management, relationship development was at the top.
Yeah, big time. Well, remember, Dad, if you're listening to today's show, it is brought to you by Range Leather. You can get amazing products at rangeleather.com. And what's better than that is if you use the code MJ15, you can save 15% off of your next order at rangeleather.com. They have bags and earrings for your wife. They're amazing, well designed, handcrafted out of Horween leather out of Laramie, Wyoming. They've got a folio like the one that Lawson on our show uses. They've got desk trays, all kinds of amazing products at rangeleather.com. And don't forget to use the code MJ15. Now, Lawson, as we dive in to today's show, I want to read a sampling of some of the responses from the survey that had to do with this topic of relationships, just to kind of like set the table. And then I'm going to turn it over to you to explain to us the world's most important principles on how to develop better relationships. No, I'm just kidding. Number one,
well,
guy said,
why don't you, let's reverse it. Let me do the easy part. Let me read, then you answer the all-knowing, all-giving.
I see what you did there.
Go for it.
One guy said he wants to be more intentional in his one-on-one time with his two young boys, slower to anger, slower to speak, and always listening. That phrase, always listening, kind of jumped out at me. One gentleman named Daniel said he wanted to be able to connect with his kids through conversation. And he put, very honestly, I'm always at a loss for words, which I appreciated that. Tim said that each year for him is a process of learning more and more about his two sons' unique needs and ways of communicating. And he said that he prays in 2025, he deepens his relationships with each of them through better understanding and greater patience. Man, yeah, great word, Tim. Jonathan said he wants to be nicer. I just love that. Straightforward, man, straight up. I want to be nicer. He says, I love my boys. I do as much as I know how to point them to God. I just don't always come across as nice in normal conversations, which I appreciated that language.
So funny, yeah.
And then David said he wanted to have a closer relationship with better communication with his adult daughter. And I just can relate to so much of what those guys shared. And there were dozens more, but that's a sampling of a handful. What are some things that came to mind for you, Lawson, as you thought about relationships and in preparation for today's show?
Yeah, and I love good old Daniel's words. I'm always at a loss for words. I think a lot of dads may feel like I'm always at a loss for too many words, or I'm always at a loss of listening. Because that's a key thing. The first one you read, slow to speak and always listening. That's such a key. When you were talking about building stronger relationships, you're talking about developing a relationship. There is sometimes a spectrum, and it's maybe not within your family, but you may come upon a total stranger and hit it off, chit chat on the bus or whatever. That's a relationship, but there's zero depth, right? That is the very beginning. And so you're not sharing things. You're not maybe, going into anything subsurface. With our kids, with our wives, with our close friends, that's different. Some of that depth comes with time. Some of it, is based on their age and maturity. Like David was talking about, having a closer relationship with better communication with my adult daughter. I can relate to that. I've got a good relationship with Abigail, but she's, states away, living in New York now. That better communication, to me, we got to really think about and define what is better. Being a better listener, being a better communicator. Let's define what goes into better, because that does strengthen relationships. Communication and listening go together. Listening is sort of a subset of communication. And so what does better look like? I thought about, so I'm going to reference this a couple times today. We have a training group, a learning and development team at our company. And one of the great courses that we have put together is for sales leaders. And so within that course, it's a 2-day in-person course. Within that course is thinking about customers and suppliers and the relationship that we have with them, because everything that we do is built upon that relationship. And so part of being a good communicator to a customer is how well you listen. Are you leaving that interaction and the customer goes, that person didn't hear a word I said, or I didn't even get a word in. And so something that we have in this content for the class is the sort of the three levels of listening. First is not listening, and it's called pretending. The second is responding, which is better than pretending. Maybe pretending would be you're present, you're physically there, but you aren't engaged. You aren't actively being a participant. Responding is at least a step up from that. And maybe that's some yes and uh-huhs and things like that. Now, is that engaging, or are you a little bit more present but not really tuned in? And then the third one is understanding. Like you are listening with the heart to seek understanding of what that person is relaying to you. And so we think about this in the context of our wives, our children. You do not want to be a pretender, because people just see right through that. You can feel that. Responding, if you're on your phone or you're watching the game or you're driving, maybe that's not the best time to engage in some sort of in-depth, heartfelt conversation. And so then the third level, which is seeking understanding, man, that's where it's at. That is where the better communication, the better listener is defined.
I was thinking about having, sometimes I will have my microphone turned on while we're recording a podcast, and I just try to react to what you're saying in real time. And I'll say, oh, yeah, And I was thinking about just having all those recorded and having Alex just drop them into the show so I don't have to listen to you. But that would be like pretending. That would be kind of going back to pretending, where, when I say, yes, those are all just pre-recorded, right, and he just drops them in, make it appear.
Right, which is what I just did to you, jerk.
Make it appear that I'm listening. I remember years ago, you mentioned sales training, and we had a guy come into a company I worked for, and he was doing training, and it wasn't purely sales training, but it was like some HR experience. And I remember thinking he was solid. Okay, he was solid. But he kept saying things like, your customer or your colleague at work will not want to hear what you have to say until they believe you have their best interests at heart, or they believe you're listening to them. And he kept using this language.
Totally.
But what was interesting to me, he seemed uniquely concerned with how other people believed he felt about them. Like there was a layer to him that was just a little bit disingenuous. And what I mean by that is, am I concerned that my children believe I care for them or believe that I'm listening? Or am I actually concerned with caring for them? Or am I actually concerned with listening to them? Like it was an interesting day. I remember him because even as he described it, he would say like, he would bring up a movie, for example, and he would say, I don't know if any of you have seen this movie. And he would continue. And there were only like 15 of us in the room.
Right.
And I thought, I mean,
why not just ask and then listen? Right.
I mean, the whole time, I got this idea that he had at the core of his training, he had a lot of really good, interesting principles, but there just seemed to be a veneer around his training that was just enough disingenuousness.
Yeah, right.
Is that a word? Disingenuousness?
It is now.
There was enough insincerity where I just discounted some of the training. And so when I come back, I remember years ago, man, I had a dad ask me, basically, I mean, I'll paraphrase, but he basically asked me, how could he set a better example so his kids would notice him reading the Bible? And as we talked about what he was trying to do, I'm telling you, man,
what did he say again? Say that again?
He wanted to know what I did so that my kids... Oh,
he's asking you this, guy.
Yeah, he wanted to know what I did so that my kids knew I was spending time in God's Word. The short answer to his question was nothing. And so what we got to during the course of our conversation was, again, he cared a lot about his kids having a certain perception of what he was doing. Like he was very focused on the perception of his children of his spiritual habits. He was not as intently focused on the spiritual habits themselves. Like it wasn't that he really wanted to be noticed. He really wanted to be like an a quote unquote example. And what it took me to was in the Sermon on the Mount when Jesus says, do not practice your religion out in front of everybody, like on a street corner to be noticed by men, but instead, go pray in secret, and your Father who sees you in secret will reward you. And I just want to encourage the dad who wants to develop stronger relationships. I would love for that dad, in part from today's show, to get an idea. And here's the basic idea. Be genuine. Be sincere.
Yeah.
Don't try to have people around you believe you're listening to them. Don't try to have people around you believe you care about them. Instead, as Lawson described a minute ago, actually listen to them. Actually care about them. And what's going to happen is the chips are going to have to fall. And what I mean, so Jesus came and he was walking on this earth for 3 years. Tons of people rejected his message. They rejected his love. They didn't care about what he thought about a certain subject or a topic. They walked away. That didn't make him a bad relationship manager. That didn't make him ineffective. What it made him was he's just going to sometimes be rejected. And there are times when we can do all the right things in a relationship and we're just not going to find that bridge to be closed. And I just want to help a dad not focus so much on the two-way street of the relationship, but instead focus on his side of that bridge. Are we doing a good job of listening, as you just described, Lawson? Are we doing a good job of caring and communicating and understanding? And when we do that, I tend to find that relationships usually go better, rather than me just trying to, quote unquote, become a better relationship. It's kind of like trying to become an influencer. I'm not anti-influencers. I'm just saying what might be more interesting is try to become a really great listener. Try to become someone who really cares. And what you're going to find is that's the rising tide that raises all of your relationships all at once.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to double down on this. Matthew 7, verse 12 says, "So whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them. for this is the law and the prophets. And I told you I'm going to reference this sales material. In the material, we call it active listening. I think what you just described is the better term for that is sincere listening. And so within sincere listening, there are some things, like Daniel in his comment said that he feels like he's always at a loss for words. To that, I would tell Daniel that's actually probably a okay start, man.
Yeah.
Versus the opposite, which is if your kids took the survey, would they have said, I can't ever get a word in when my dad's talking to me? And so
Kent Evans' kids, actually, yes, that may be exactly what they say.
Right. So do some of these things. Here's a short list of some things that to Daniel, to all of us, I would ask, let's think about when you're with someone and you're building a relationship, you're going a little deeper, you're working on your listening skills, you're working on being a sincere listener. Do some reflecting. Like, it's okay to stop the conversation. You don't need to have an answer. Stop the conversation and do 2 or 3 of these things. You can reflect on what you just heard, just kind of regurgitate what it is that you think you heard. You can validate it, give it some commentary that shows that you are seeking to understand where they're coming from. So that'd be validating. And then reframe it.
Yeah.
Maybe they are coming. They're in an experience and they're trying to explain something to you that's been bothering them. Your role as the dad is to be there, to listen, to maybe help them think through it. It's not always the responsibility of the dad to go, okay, I just heard you. Here's your 2 choices. Here's exactly what I think you should do. Now go do one of these 2 things in this order and follow this process. Boom, there's the formula, and I just fixed it. Now, sometimes you can just reframe it. Maybe tell a story of something that they are experiencing that you have experienced. Put it back into a context or an analogy, something that shows them that you get it. The purpose of those 2 or 3 things is to show that you are sincerely trying to understand where they're coming from. And so by either reflecting on it, giving it some validation, reframing it, those things help the person who is being listened to experience what that scripture from Matthew 7:12 says, whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them. And so think about it that way. I think that's an easy way to kind of frame up listening. Do you want to be heard? We all want to be heard. We all want to have someone's empathy when we're going through something, or sharing our excitement or our passion when we're excited about something. And so you can certainly tell when someone is not sincerely paying attention, listening, seeking to understand. So do what you do to them, what you would want them to do to you. And give you some of that good, honest, genuine, caring feedback.
Yeah. One of the best relationships I have with a friend outside of my wife and my kids is a guy named John. And John texted me the other day and just paid me a very small compliment. He just said, "Hey, I noticed something. That was really killer. Great job." And we're good friends, but he noticed something kind of in a work context. And it made me think of the verse in 1 Thessalonians 5:11. Therefore, encourage one another and build each other up, just as in fact you are doing. A lot of us as dads, a gateway to us having better relationships around us is being more encouraging. I often, one of my personal strengths, which is also a personal weakness, is I took a test 10 years ago or so, and one of the things it tested for in your kind of your work style is what's called your level of criticality. It's a little bit like kind of the jerk factor. And basically it is how fast are you, or how likely are you to be critical of the situation and for certain times or even certain jobs, that's a very useful skill, right? If you're an airline pilot or a policeman, the high criticality saves lives. Like it's a very important skill. However, if you have too much of it in a leadership context, you're just always pointing out what's wrong, right? You're just always going, yeah, nice job, Lawson, but you didn't say that one thing right. And the audio was great, but here's the 1% better it could be. And you're always critical. Always critical. And so my criticality factor was dialed up, was dialed up too high. For it, like there's a range, where it's like healthy, and I was above the healthy range. And I know for sure, if there's a guy listening to this who knows me personally or has worked with me for a while, they're nodding and amening right now. Stop it, Lawson. Put your stupid hand down. By the way, you raised your hand incorrectly. The way you had your finger. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, right.
But there is a sense in which, as dads, one of the reasons that the relationships around us are not as healthy or vibrant or open is because we're stuck in that mode of like correcting our kids all the time or telling them what they're doing wrong all the time. And I think of this verse, man, therefore encourage one another and build each other up, just as in fact you are doing. Sometimes the ability to be critical or pick out what is wrong with a situation, like a 3-year-old can do that. It takes a mature, full, responsible, caring, like word-filled, spirit-filled person to say, hey, man, you're really good at this. Nice job. And just to move on. And so, Dad, we're talking about listening. We're talking about active listening. We're talking about the golden rule, as Lawson pointed out in Matthew 7. Also, I want you to remember, look at your kids and try to find a way to encourage them. Is there something you can say that encourages them? Because you'll find it really oils and greases the relational skids with people around you.
Yeah, that's a good word, man. That encouragement, it does not negate criticality, right? So there are things, maybe in your case back in the day or whatever, I'm
Except
sure
for you.
Right. Except for me and the producers of this show that just hear nothing but complaints and critical picking apart.
Exactly.
Encouragement doesn't negate criticality. It is a partner. You can still correct and help your kids or your wives, or even ask for it yourself. Ask for some critical input on something that you're working on. That builds trust. Trust is
right.
If there's a 3-legged stool, listening, encouragement, and trust, they kind of all work together to help lift up that relationship. And when you're encouraging someone and it's accurate. So what I say is it doesn't negate criticality, is if you see somebody just whiff it, and mess up a situation, and all you do is rah and cheer them on, you miss the point, right? They know that. They know that's not genuine. But so use your encouragement to help. Like, that was a mistake, but hey, bud, come here, check this out. Here's what we could do different, next time. That's encouraging without just being critical. Do you know what I'm saying?
I do. And I think if dads tend to err on one side of that, it's usually on the side of being too critical. Not always, but generally. And it's not because we're trying to be jerks. It's because, you're trying to keep your 3-year-old from putting his hand on the stove and keep your 5-year-old out of running out of traffic. Like there's a lot of correcting that you do as a dad, especially when your kids are young and underfoot. And then over time, as they hit their teen years and their late teen years, we got to treat them like young adults. And we've got to help them see what they're doing well. I remember a couple years ago, Lawson, I team taught with a guy over 4 weeks. He did 2 weeks, I did 2 weeks. And he is my senior by about 20 years in age and by a lot in terms of life experience. This guy ran a really big organization. He has, if I've spoken up front 200 times, he's spoken 2,000 times. Like he just has had a lot of experience at both communicating and leadership. And I remember asking him if when I was teaching, if he would do me the favor of being a bit critical, like not just sitting in the audience and receiving it, but if he would pay attention to some things and give me some feedback. I'm sure if I went and searched for it, I could go find the email that he sent me the day after my presentation. And he pointed out 10 things I did right. And I know what you were about to think. You thought he was going to point out his way of quote unquote being critical was him telling you what you do right. And I heard a really influential speaker the other day who said this on a podcast. I won't like name drop, but I'll just say he was like, yeah, he tends to discount positive feedback and all he wants is, critical feedback. Don't tell me what I did right. I know that. Tell me what I did wrong so I can improve. And I thought, well, you know what? I don't know, man. I don't know. I would kind of challenge that. So here's what I mean. This guy said, hey, you picked a Bible verse and you made a really clever connection to that Bible verse. That was a positive piece of feedback. This guy, his name is Ken, that he gave me about my presentation. That's really good feedback because I should do that again. Do that again. So sometimes we masquerade as men who want to learn because all we want is critical feedback. I don't listen to the positive stuff. Tell me what I did wrong so I can be better. Well, right. I'm not saying don't do that. What I am saying is if you're really good at using metaphors when you speak, or if you're really good at using numbers to convey a story, or if you're really good at insightfully perceiving the mood in the room, for me to point that out to you is a really good piece of critical feedback because I'm not being critical of you, but I'm critically observing what you do well.
There you go.
And that is something you can pour gas on and do more of that.
Yeah, right on.
It's like when a guy tells me he is an introvert and he says, therefore, I'm not very good at communicating. I want to help that guy and go, bro, the beginning of communication is being a really effective listener. And most introverts are way better at listening than most extroverts. So frankly, I think introverts have a leg up in the area of communication.
Yeah. And you don't have to solve everything all at once. As we think about this and hone in on building relationships, it's not an overnight thing at all. This is something that does take some time and take some attention. I read something the other day. It said, sometimes the most modest changes can bring about enormous effects. It goes along with a similar thought of, and I've heard before with navigation, with airlines or a ship, being 1 degree off at a half a mile makes very little difference, but 1 degree off maintained over 500 miles, it makes a huge
You're on the wrong
difference.
Continent.
Right.
You will no longer be landing in Dallas today. You'll be landing in St. Louis. We apologize for the inconvenience.
But so guess what? There's good news in that because what you don't need to do is try to think about course correcting by 90 degrees.
Right.
And making a hard, sharp right turn. Modify it by a degree, but be consistent. And stick with that. Work on if you're a great encourager, hone it just a little bit. If you need to work on listening and you talk way too much, hone that just a little bit. But keep it up. Keep it up, and you'll find that it compounds itself and you get better and better over time. So what I'm saying is these are some good tidbits. You've got listening, encouraging, building trust, and I want to hone in on building trust and get your thoughts on this. But those three, they work together, they go together. And so I think first, if you're thinking about this and you already have something on your mind that you want to work on within your family, part of determining your destination is determining where you are currently. Where's your starting point?
Absolutely.
And so be honest with yourself. Define where you are on one of these, these three scales: the listening, the encouraging, the building trust, because that's going to help you align where you want to be, right? You've got to have your starting point to determine where you're going to go. And so that's one thought there. The other is, I don't know what to do with this. I literally came across this recently, and I want to get your take on it. And it's about building trust, where trust is the foundation of a relationship. I mentioned the three-legged stool, but I think maybe it's more of a foundation. That trust is everything, man. And so what I came across were these two thoughts. So listen to this and just kind of respond. integrity plus intent. Integrity, doing what you say you're going to do, plus your intent equals character. And then capabilities plus results equal competence. And the combination of character and competence can demonstrate our commitment to building and sustaining that trust. So character is a result of integrity and intent. Do what you say you're going to do with the right intention. Competence comes from capabilities and results. So if you're a dad that is always promising something but never follow through, or even if you're competent enough to pull it off, the results aren't there. Or if you're just too harsh and too critical, that's the result. But your capability is off. You're being too hard. That's your competence. And those two things, competence and character, coming together within your fatherhood and demonstrating that level of commitment. Does that ring true with you?
Oh, man. I love those equations. I think that what's passing through my head as you share those are the characters of God, the characteristics of God, I should say. So, for example, in this idea of integrity, I have a friend named John Blumberg who wrote a book years ago called Return on Integrity. And John would have a very interesting and I think very developed and very advanced view on the notion of integrity. He's kind of studied it for years and is really brilliant. And one of the things that we learn about integrity is we tend to describe it in shorthand by saying, you're a man of your word, or you do what you say you're going to do. And that is mostly true. That's mostly true. It's actually, I think, more true to say that integrity is when your actions line up with your values. So, for example, really, really evil people can have super high integrity from an absolute understanding standpoint because their actions line up perfectly with their values. Now, we would say, well, that's a bad person. Agreed. That's an evil person. That's a wicked person, no question. However, you can't argue with their integrity because in the end, they are who they say they are. They are who they say they are. And so for me, I like that nuance to the idea of integrity because it maps onto God our Father with absolute perfection. And what I mean by that is
perfect, man.
He said, Jesus said, I will never leave you or forsake you. I will give you the Holy Spirit. God said, my word is eternal. And God says, I don't change like shifting shadows, shifting sands like man. I'm not a man where I change like men do. So God is perfectly integrous. He's perfectly integrous. In fact, if you look at the word logos in the Greek about the word of God, you find out that the Greeks had this really nuanced and very deep definition of this idea of logos. It's not just the words on the paper. It's the words mixed with the spirit and the intent and the validity kind of all wrapped into one. And so it's almost like you could have a logos that is the center of who you are, not just what you say, but do you do what you say? And so this idea of integrity plus intent equals character. For us, God says what he says. He means it. He never deviates, and his intent is good. His intent is good. I read I was reflecting as I looked at my 2024 Lawson in the rearview mirror, some things that I've read this past year. And if I extended about a year and a half, I read Tim Keller's book on pain and suffering. I think it was called Walking with God Through Pain and Suffering or something like that. And it's one of the best books I've ever read on the topic of suffering and evil and why things don't go the way we hope. And one of the things I took from that book is you can suffer better if you believe God is good. Even though your situation may be really bad. I'm wearing a tie today, which I think might be the first time in 3 years I've worn a tie to one of our podcast recording sessions, because right after this, I'm going to a funeral. And no one's going to say, oh, this is just great. I'm so glad we're all going to a funeral. No one's going to say that. However, I'm going to the funeral of a Christian woman who walked a very God-honoring life and is going to be celebrated by a bunch of people who love her and love the Lord because of her walk. It'll be as good of a funeral as you can possibly have. And so in that sense, you go, man, is the funeral going to be good? In a way. In a way, it is going to be good because it's going to be the celebration of someone being who they said they were going to be and walking with Jesus till the day they died. Man, that's about as good as death gets, right? It's about as good as death gets. And so if you believe God is good and you believe that he has integrity, that he will do what he says he's going to do, then you've got God's character. Love that equation. And then the other equation you put in our notes is capabilities plus results equals confidence. And I love that because if I told you over and over again that I am a scratch golfer, I have a 0 handicap and I shoot 72 and I can par every hole. If I told you that over and over again, and then you saw me play one hole of golf, you would immediately question my competence because you would see a divergence between what I say are my capabilities and the results of where the ball goes on the course, right? So you remember you came in earlier last year and we played a round of golf at this really nice place. Thank you, Blake Turner, for hosting us at Valhalla. It was so amazing. And of the 12 guys who went out to golf that day, there was a guy. I won't mention his name. Don't mention his name. I don't want to be accused of name dropping. But there was a guy who walked on the course, had never played that golf course before. This is a championship level course. And he shot a 72. He shot a 72. Flat, straight, par golf. Had never seen that golf course before in his life.
Wow.
Now, he didn't have to tell any of us, I'm a really good golfer. The conversation never needed to happen. All you had to do was watch his game and then add up his score at the end and realize this guy has the capabilities and he got results. And so you just immediately say he's competent. Character and competence, love the equation. What I want to close with today,
and the two together, though, like you said, tying that back to, do you trust? Does that build trust?
That's right.
And reflecting the character of God, who we trust.
And
those
I want to
things
say,
go together.
Yeah, I want to say two things to the dad who's listening. Number one other idea. Just as we're talking about listening and encouraging and building trust, one other idea I want to throw into the mix is the idea of prayer. Philippians 2, 3, and 4 says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interest, but the interest of others. Galatians 6:2 says, carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. So for those of you who have older kids, who want to build a stronger relationship with your older children, teens, late teens, adult children, ask them how you can pray for them. Ask them how you can pray for them, and then pray for them. Because what you're going to find is you're carrying their burdens, you're elevating their needs above your own,
right?
And you're being humble in that process. That's a relationship builder. That's a relationship accelerator. Don't forget prayer in your equation. And third, and then last, I want to say, don't forget that you are absolutely going to screw this up. Let me encourage you, right? You absolutely are going to fall short of being a perfect dad who perfectly handles every situation, who perfectly has the right character, who perfectly has the right competence, who perfectly builds trust. You are not going to hit that mark 1,000 times in a row. Therefore, knowing what to do when that arrow bounces off the target and goes lost in the woods is essential. It's essential. How do you rebuild trust when you've broken it? Or how do you help someone come back to you in a relationship when you've pushed them away a little bit?
That's a good episode. That's a good episode just itself there.
Well, we could do that. Let's do that. Here, we'll do cliffhanger. This is a cliffhanger week. Cliffhanger week is join us next week for the answer to, but the answer is going to be found. The answer is going to be found in humility. The answer is going to be found in Psalm 51. The answer is going to be found in your capacity to come back and say, hey, Lawson, that one time I did that thing, man, I am sorry for that. That was my bad. I was out of line. I did that wrong. Your capacity to do that is like relational oil that you pour in the machine of the relationships all around you. And I need to do more of that in 2025, acknowledging the small and the big ways I fail people. But I have done a fair amount in the past. I have done a fair amount where I can say, hey, I was out of line. Dad was harsh. Dad was angry. Dad did this wrong. I didn't listen very well. So Dad, listen, try to get all these things right. Let's go, right? Let's be about the objective of treating others as you would want to be treated, like Lawson pointed out in Matthew 7. At the same time, let's acknowledge the fact that we're going to miss this mark. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. We are going to miss this mark. And when we do, we are not actually destroying the relationship unless we handle it poorly, because we actually are being given a gift. And the gift is the gift of reconciliation as part of the relational dynamic.
Very nice.
And that builds stronger relationships.
Yeah, amen.
It builds strong relationships. So let's go. We're excited to be on this ride with you. And actually, I would love to do that, Lawson. You and I were talking about episodes.
Yeah, me too.
I want to tackle that next week because I want to help dads dive in to this piece of the relational equation. So tune in next week, Dad. We are grateful that you were here today. Lawson, thank you. Alex, thanks for being behind the scenes. We will talk to you next week at Father on Purpose. Hey, Dad, thank you for listening to today's show. If you found this episode helpful, remember, you can get all the content and show notes at manhoodjourney.org/podcast. And if you really liked it, please consider doing 3 things. Number 1, share this podcast with someone. You can hit the share button in your app, wherever you listen to podcasts, or just call a person up and tell them to listen in.
We're sorry, your call cannot be completed as dialed.
Number 2, subscribe to this podcast so you get episodes automatically. That helps us as well to help dads find the show. You can do that through your favorite listening app, whatever that is. And finally, review this podcast. Leave us a review, good or bad, wherever you listen. Those reviews also help other dads find the show. You can always learn more about what we're up to at manhoodjourney.org or fatheronpurpose.org. We will see you next week.
Absolutely great.